Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's edition of the ILO Global Discussion Series, which is entitled Strengthening Labor Market Governance in Uzbekistan. Today's program will feature some of the leading figures in the multi-year effort to eradicate forced and child labor in the cotton sector in Uzbekistan. My name is Kevin Cassidy. I am the director and representative of the Bretton Woods organizations and multilaterals in Washington, D.C., as the director of the ILO Office for the United States. Today's event, which would normally be in person, is online due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and we are grateful for your participation and time today. First, some housekeeping issues. All mics except the speaker will be muted throughout this presentation. We are providing translation for today's events, and the available languages can be accessed by the interpretation icon on the bottom of your screen. We have a robust set of distinguished speakers today, and there will not be a Q&A segment. However, if you have any questions, please send them to us through the Q&A function, and I will try to introduce them as time allows. We have some slight changes of today's list of speakers. Our opening speaker, Her Excellency Madam Tanzila Norbayeva, Senate Chair and Head of the National Commission on Forced Labor and Human Trafficking, has been called to a special meeting and will try to join us later in the program. We will play a recorded message for her opening, and His Excellency Mr. Erkan Mokadinov, the First Deputy Minister of Labor and Employment Relations, will speak later in the program on her behalf as she is unable to join us. Additionally, Mr. Azam Farmanov isn't feeling well today and will be replaced by Shukrat Ganev. We all remember in 2017 when President of Uzbekistan delivered his historic speech at the UN General Assembly in New York. There, he had announced the beginning of a new era in Uzbekistan and the end of child and forced labor. This was a clear demonstration of political commitment, which has been followed by a number of reforms and changes in the country ever since. In a few minutes, you will get an update on the progress of these reforms, and we at the ILO in Washington have been closely involved in this journey, and as you know, we have arranged a number of meetings and events in previous years on this very topic. So it will be an exciting event today to hear the results from the 2020 cotton harvest, and I'm looking forward to the statements by our distinguished speakers. At this time, I would like to ask my colleague to play the introductory recorded message by Her Excellency Tanzila Norbayeva.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, участники сегодняшнего мероприятия, в первую очередь разрешите поблагодарить Международную организацию труда в лице господина Кевина Кассиди, директора бюро МОД в США и представителя МОД в Бреттон-Вудских и многосторонних организациях, который любезно предоставил нам сегодняшнюю площадку. Также хочу поблагодарить бюро МОД в Москве и отдел основополагающих принципов и прав в области труда в Женеве за существенную и последовательную поддержку нашей работы по защите и продвижению трудовых прав. Хочу поприветствовать всех участников данного мероприятия, в частности, уважаемых членов международных представительств в Узбекистане и правительственных структур США, социальных партнеров, деловое сообщество, гражданское общество и средства массовой информации. Для меня большая честь принимать участие в этой дискуссии в Вашингтоне. И Узбекистан и США являются хорошими партнерами. Нас связывают тесные взаимовыгодные отношения и сотрудничество по ряду вопросов, в том числе в сфере предотвращения и искоренения детского и принудительного труда и торговли людьми. Пользуясь случаем, разрешите поблагодарить правительство Соединенных Штатов Америки за долгосрочную поддержку и взаимодействие, выразить надежду на дальнейшую совместную работу. Дамы и господа, хочу особо отметить, что за последние годы под руководством уважаемого президента Республики Узбекистан Шавката Мирзияева в нашей стране осуществляются масштабные демократические реформы. Большое внимание уделяется обеспечению прав человека, развитию гражданского общества, усилению международного сотрудничества в этих процессах. Вопрос искоренения детского и принудительного труда, который является одним из основополагающих принципов Узбекистана по обеспечению прав человека, также поднят на уровень государственной политики. Об этом свидетельствует принятие только в 2020 году 16 нормативно-правовых актов в данной сфере. Вам известно, что на протяжении нескольких лет совместно с Международной организацией труда, Всемирным банком, при активной поддержке правительств США, Швейцарии, Германии и других стран Европейского Союза Узбекистан ведет интенсивную работу по полному устранению рисков детского и принудительного труда в ходе хлопковой кампании. Эта работа дает свои плоды. Можно с уверенностью сегодня сказать, что системного принудительного и детского труда в Узбекистане не существует. Но, несмотря на достигнутые результаты, отдельные риски принудительного труда, хотя и редко, но все еще существовали на местах. Безусловно, мы не оставляем без внимания ни один случай. Какие же действия мы предприняли в 2020 году? Основной упор мы сделали на предотвращение нарушений. Эти меры в первую очередь включают системные реформы сельскохозяйственного сектора и, в частности, хлопковой отрасли. Мы постепенно переводим эту отрасль на рыночные отношения, где сам рынок будет диктовать, сколько хлопка необходимо сеять и собирать. Вам известно про внедрение хлопково-текстильных кластеров на всей территории нашей страны. На сегодняшний день функционирует 95 кластеров в 116 районах республики, на долю которых приходится 90,4% посевных площадей под хлопок. В 2020 году был отменен государственный заказ на выращивание хлопка, так называемая система квот. Ведется активная работа по механизации процесса выращивания и сбора хлопка. Было приобретено 12 тысяч единиц современных сельскохозяйственных машин, известных мировых отечественных производителей, как John Deere, Case, New Holland и другие. При сборе урожая хлопка 2020 года было задействовано в 4,2 раза больше единиц хлопкоуборочной техники по сравнению с 2019 годом. Это составляет 700 единиц. Также мы уделяем особое значение улучшению условий труда сборщиков и системы оплаты за собранный хлопок. Начиная с 2017 года государство постепенно повышало минимальную оплату труда сборщикам. Таким образом, в 2020 году она была повышена на 25% по сравнению с 2019 годом. Некоторые кластеры даже оплачивали больше установленного минимума, чтобы привлечь как можно больше добровольных сборщиков. На законодательном уровне была внесена уголовная ответственность за повторное использование принудительного труда. За первое нарушение штрафы были повышены 10-кратно. В целях дальнейшего совершенствования трудового законодательства принят новый закон о занятости населения. Разработан проект Трудового кодекса в новой редакции. На сегодняшний день разработан и внесен в парламент Республики Узбекистан проект закона о внесении изменений и дополнений к Уголовному кодексу, который предусматривает усиление ответственности за принуждение к труду, за сексуальную эксплуатацию несовершеннолетних детей. Масштабная работа велась и по информированию населения, работодателей, властей о неприемлемости принудительного труда. Это кропотливая работа, так как она влечет за собой изменение мышления и поведения людей. Было проведено 44 пресс-конференций и брифингов, более 5000 круглых столов, 20 социальных роликов транслировалось по телевидению и в социальных сетях, около 600 статей опубликовано было в печатных изданиях и на веб-сайтах, было установлено более 1200 баннеров и распространено сотни тысяч информационных материалов. Вся эта работа была нацелена на то, чтобы повысить уровень осведомленности населения об их праве выбора и о незаконности принуждения к сбору хлопка. В материалах также содержатся телефонные номера горячих линий, адреса веб-сайтов и телеграм-каналов для обращений с гарантией о конфиденциальности заявителя. Этим мерам сопутствует регулярное обучение в области справедливого найма и недопущения принудительного труда. Таким образом, под эгидой Национальной комиссии по противодействию торговле людьми и принудительному труду и в сотрудничестве с МОД было обучено около 4000 региональных и районных специалистов, которые участвовали в процессе найма сборщиков, фермеров, представителей кластеров и инспекторов труда. В плане непосредственных действий в случае выявления принудительного труда стоит отметить работу инспекции труда. В ходе хлопковой кампании 2020 года инспекцией труда было выявлено 46 случаев принудительного труда, 42 должностных лица, в том числе руководители предприятий, хакимы и их заместители, были привлечены к ответственности по статье 51 Кодекса об административной ответственности. Это за допущение принудительного труда, а еще по 6 случаям соответствующие документы были внесены в суд. Также за допущение фактов принудительного труда на местах решением правительства Республики Узбекистан хакимы 5 районов Наманганской, Ташкентской и Хорезмской областей получили выговоры и были предупреждены о снятии с должности за повторные правонарушения в будущем. Механизмы обратной связи по вопросам труда при Министерстве занятости и трудовых отношений, а также при Федерации профсоюзов продолжили свою работу в 2020 году. В целом, за весь хлопковый сезон в механизм обратной связи поступило 970 обращений, связанных с нарушениями трудовых прав граждан и сборщиков хлопка. Они касались задержек выплат заработной платы сборщикам, удержания из заработной платы, охраны труда, отсутствия письменных трудовых договоров и принудительного труда. Механизмы обратной связи играют важную роль в выявлении нарушений, так как они помогают нам реагировать незамедлительно. Но они не являются единственным нашим источником информации о правонарушениях в сфере труда. Инспекция труда проводит регулярный мониторинг. Наряду с этим инспектора находятся в постоянном контакте с правозащитниками и наблюдают за социальными сетями. Также проводится парламентский контроль со стороны рабочих групп, которые были созданы Верхней палатой Маджлиса, в состав которого входят сенаторы, депутаты, журналисты и блогеры, а также общественный мониторинг хлопковой страды со стороны профсоюзов. То есть у нас проводилось 3 мониторинга. Это мониторинг третьей стороны, парламентский мониторинг и общественный мониторинг. Последнее направление наших действий не менее важно. Оно относится к оценке наших мер. Нам важно понимать, работают ли наши законы на практике, насколько оперативно функционируют наши механизмы по выявлению нарушений, насколько эффективно реагирует система защиты прав в области труда и как ощущают себя наши главные бенефициары, наши люди. Эта информация очень важна для нас, так как она является основой наших дальнейшей политики и действий. Мы будем постоянно усовершенствовать их для достижения нашей цели полного искоренения рисков принудительного труда. Координация мер, связанных с детским и принудительным трудом, а также с торговлей людьми, на сегодняшний день успешно осуществляется Национальной комиссией, которой руководит председатель Сената. Ежеквартально мы проводим обсуждения, где заслушиваем отчеты соответствующих и руководителей ведомств, а также хакимов областей. В 2020 году в Национальной комиссии было принято 7 планов действий в данной сфере. Хотелось бы отметить, что в Национальной комиссии также приняты отдельные дорожные карты по реализации рекомендаций, которые отражены в ежегодных докладах Госдепартамента США о торговле людьми в мире и Министерства труда США о наихудших формах детского труда. Пользуясь случаем, я выражаю признательность за предоставляемые рекомендации, которые, несомненно, направлены на дальнейшее повышение эффективности мер по противодействию торговле людьми и принудительному труду. Мы и дальше готовы к тесному сотрудничеству с американскими партнерами, особенно с Госдепартаментом и Министерством труда США, с USAID и другими структурами США в сфере противодействия торговле людьми и принудительному труду. И я выражаю надежду, что американская сторона также полностью поддержит все наши предложения. Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you very much, Madam Narbayeva, Senate Chair and Head of the National Commission on Forced Labor and Human Trafficking. Just very quickly, the remainder of the program will be broken into three parts. Survey results of the ILO third-party monitoring of the cotton harvest will be 30 minutes, started off by Mr. Jonas Astrup, the ILO Chief Technical Advisor, and then followed by Mr. Shukrat Ganev, an independent civil society monitor. The second component is the reactions from the international community, where the ambassadors will have 5 minutes each in the following order. His Excellency, Mr. Olivier Chauve, the Ambassador of Switzerland to Uzbekistan, then His Excellency, Mr. Gunther Overfeld, the Ambassador of Germany to Uzbekistan, followed by His Excellency, Mr. Daniel Rosenblum, Ambassador of the United States to Uzbekistan, then His Excellency, Mr. Yussi Narvi, Ambassador of the European Union to Uzbekistan, then Ms. Helena Fraser, the UN Resident Coordinator in Uzbekistan, and then finally Mr. Marco Montovanelli, the World Bank Country Manager in Uzbekistan, and then closed by a message either by Her Excellency Tanzila Narbayeva, or as mentioned earlier, our colleague, the Deputy Minister will be speaking on her behalf, Mr. Erkan Mukadinov. At this time, I'd like to invite my colleague, Mr. Jonas Astrup, to provide us with the results. Jonas, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. The cotton harvest in Uzbekistan is the world's largest recruitment effort, with just under 2 million people picking cotton every year from September to November. ILO has been monitoring the cotton harvest for child labor since 2013 and for child labor and forced labor since 2015 under an agreement with the World Bank. The ILO third-party monitoring project is funded by a multi-donor trust fund managed by the World Bank with generous contributions from the European Union, Switzerland, the US State Department, and GIZ, the German Development Agency. 2020 was a special year. The fact that we right now are looking at each other on screens instead of enjoying each other's company is just one of the effects. But what happens when 2 million people are recruited for work during a pandemic? What was the impact on child labor, on prevalence of forced labor, and on working conditions? And how do you monitor the process in a credible and scientific manner without exposing staff, consultants, partners, and pickers to risks? These are just some of the questions I will try and answer over the next 10 minutes. Basically, the ILO third-party monitoring comes down to 3 key issues: credibility, results, and recommendations. Let me start with credibility. Why should you trust the ILO third-party monitoring? Well, I think you should, and I can back that up with facts. We conducted over 9,000 interviews during the 2020 cotton harvest. We used a mix of qualitative and quantitative questionnaires covering all provinces and all districts of the country. We worked with a team of 17 independent civil society monitors, an equal mix of men and women. These are truly independent activists we have worked with over the last 2 to 3 years. They use ILO standards, and we have involved them in the development of the TPM methodology and the analysis of data. We had full and unhindered access to the feedback mechanisms of the Ministry of Employment and Labor Relations, as well as the Federation of Trade Unions. We closely followed the investigations by over 400 labor inspectors and kept track of every single case, including the punishment of perpetrators. But you don't have to take my word for it. The 2020 ILO third-party monitoring methodology achieved independent review board approval to ensure it is scientifically and ethically sound. We don't claim to have a monopoly on monitoring, and we certainly don't claim to be perfect, but we firmly believe that our results are credible, and we hope they can continue to inform policy decisions both inside and outside Uzbekistan. So, what were the results of the 2020 monitoring? 12.9% of the working age population participated in the harvest. 65% of pickers were women and 35% were men. 81% of pickers were from rural areas and 19% from urban areas. On average, each picker participated in the harvest for 21 days. The average total wage received by a picker in 2020 was 1.54 million Uzbek sums, or the equivalent of $150. 60% of pickers said that the 2020 cotton harvest was their only source of cash income this year. Many respondents shared their concerns regarding COVID-19. During both the qualitative and the quantitative phases of the ILO monitoring, respondents had a high level of awareness about coronavirus. 33% of pickers said that masks were always provided. 36% of pickers said that hand sanitizers or water and soap for washing hands was always available. And 67%, 2/3, said that they could always maintain social distancing during lunchtime and during breaks. The ILO did not find systematic child labor in the 2020 cotton harvest. There were isolated cases at the local level, and the fact that some schools were closed during the pandemic meant that some children accompanied their parents to the fields. We observed a robust effort by the government to eliminate risks of child labor. The ILO did also not observe any systemic forced labor during the 2020 harvest. On the contrary, we observed a systemic effort by the government to eradicate forced labor. There were examples of uneven implementation at the local level. The reduction of forced labor accelerated in 2020. Our data demonstrates a 33% drop in the share of pickers who experienced forced labor. The vast majority of pickers participated in the harvest voluntarily, but about 4% experienced different types or different forms of coercion. This group includes pickers who were directly threatened, pickers who were not directly threatened, but who perceived a negative consequence if they declined, and thirdly, replacement pickers, who themselves are not are victims of forced labor, but it can be assumed that the person they replace experienced some form of coercion. With regard to enforcement, the ILO observed that the labor inspection not only reacted to cases, but also proactively made a significant number of inspections, and this is a positive trend. The investigations of the labor inspection led to the punishment of 42 heads of institutions and deputy hukims, mayors or governors, if you like. Furthermore, 5 hukims received formal punishment by the cabinet of ministers for forced labor violations. The ILO did not observe any criminal prosecutions for forced labor during the 2020 cotton harvest. There were a number of reasons for this, but we wish to encourage the General Prosecutor's Office to play a more active role going forward. The full report goes into more detail about this. The coordination through the National Commission on Forced Labor and Human Trafficking was again successful. By combining and coordinating these issues across government agencies, employers, trade unions, and independent civil society, Uzbekistan has enjoyed tremendous results and serves as an inspiration to other countries. The Senate Commission could further enhance its work by strengthening systems for victim support and redress. The agricultural reforms undertaken by the government have the potential for addressing the risks of forced labor, as well as simultaneously creating much needed employment opportunities. Economic growth would enable further reforms in education, health, infrastructure, and in other areas. These reforms need to be supported by the international community. Trade and investment decisions by responsible international companies are likely to benefit the further abolition of legacies of the centrally planned economy. They can also have a positive impact on compliance with international labor standards. Some provinces and some districts had very few or no forced labor cases in 2020. This, combined with the fact that some textile clusters have switched or are switching to mechanized harvesting, supports the view that it would be possible for international investors or buyers to manage labor risks in their supply chains when sourcing from Uzbekistan. ILO suggests that responsible sourcing of Uzbek cotton, textiles, or garments should be facilitated and encouraged. ILO stands ready to pilot tools and mechanisms in Uzbekistan to enable international brands and retailers to make informed business decisions. So again, in summary, the ILO third-party monitoring comes down to three key issues: credibility, results, and recommendations. Our methodology is scientific and independent. We collaborate with Uzbek civil society activists who are on the ground and understand the local context. The results show a 33% drop in forced labor compared to last year. Still lots of work to do, but the reforms are working and continue to have an impact. No systematic child labor and no systemic forced labor. Our recommendations include more criminal prosecutions, continued liberalization of the cotton sector, and further steps in terms of freedom of association and registration of civil society organizations. We also encourage responsible sourcing from Uzbekistan. Credibility, results, and recommendations. The details are available in the full report from the ILO website. On this note, I wish to just thank everybody who made it possible for us to conduct the 2020 monitoring. There are too many to mention by name, but the National Commission, the tripartite constituents, as well as the hundreds of labor inspectors and civil society activists across the country, the World Bank and the TPM donors, and of course my colleagues Oksana and Sayora, and a special thanks to Kevin and his team in Washington for organizing this launch event today. Thank you very much.
Dennis, thank you very much. At this time, I'd like to offer the floor to Shukrat, a human rights defender and civil society monitor. Shukrat, please, sir.
Благодарю, Кевин. Огромное спасибо организаторам мероприятия за то, что я сегодня имею возможность и имею честь представить взгляды и рекомендации 17 активистов, с которыми мы работали весь этот сезон. Для меня это большая честь еще и кроме этого, я хотел бы сказать о том, что я хотел бы поблагодарить тот пул экспертов, который был привлечен со стороны МОД, которые помогли семинарами и тренингами нашим активистам понять методологию, довольно сложную методологию онлайн-опросов в этом году. И таким образом наши активисты приобрели этот бесценный опыт, который я рекомендую тиражировать в дальнейшем и в других направлениях. Я полагаю также, что основным отличием, кроме этого года, кроме того, что у нас была пандемия, в этом году, в отличие от прошлых лет, мы так и не зарегистрировали некого довольно большого количества принуждения в прямой форме. Нет системности, как уже отметил господин Аструб, ни в детском принудительном труде, нет системности ни в принудительном труде вообще. И это главный признак того, повторюсь, того, что реформы начали работать. Я как активист и правозащитник подтверждаю это, как и мои 17 коллег, которые провели этот мониторинг. Это, наверное, главное. Другим признаком, который я хотел бы отметить этот год, я хотел бы сказать, что апробацию с прошлого года прошел еще раз на эффективность и жизнеспособность тот самый механизм обратной связи, который был создан в партнерстве с Министерством труда, с правительством Узбекистана и гражданским сообществом при сотрудничестве МОД. Это очень важное достижение, если вспомнить, что у нас было в республике каких-то лет 5 назад. Поскольку это огромный прорывный шаг для нашего гражданского сообщества. Сегодня, в этом году, во всяком случае, мы как активисты получили легитимизацию от Министерства труда в виде бейджев, которые разрешали юридически нам непосредственно проводить мониторинг. Мы могли его проводить и на поле, как в прошлом году, но мы делали это онлайн, исходя из чувства безопасности и COVID. Конечно, это большое достижение. Другим достижением этого партнерства является то, что мы видели мгновенную реакцию инспекторов труда в Министерстве. Как они реагировали в онлайн-режиме. Мы имели возможность наблюдать и переспрашивать наших респондентов, действительно ли к ним пришли люди из министерства и уточняли, насколько правильно и справедливо были решены те проблемы, которые они поднимали нам в ходе опросов. И это решалось. Безусловно, не все жалобы подтверждались, безусловно, не все было гладко. Я не хочу на этом говорить. И вот эти вот 4%, я повторюсь, это сотни и сотни ущемленных прав, которыми надо бороться. И я надеюсь, что мы сведем это к какому-то минимуму в дальнейшем. Но есть начало, есть профессиональное начало, когда гражданское сообщество начинает создавать конструктивный диалог с правительством, когда гражданское сообщество получает легитимизацию в виде бейджев, и когда гражданское сообщество начинает квалифицированно поднимать уровень мониторов, причем в такой сложный период, как пандемия. Это очень важное достижение для нас. Конечно, одно из непосредственных рекомендаций на будущее я хотел бы все-таки отметить, что система найма между кластерами, фермерами и непосредственно сборщиками дает некие недостатки. Мы видим их надо исправлять. Нет четко обозначенной правовой основы при оформлении документов. На это жаловались многие респонденты. Особенно со стороны кластеров. Я думаю, что в кластерах необходимо поднять планку юридического оформления контрактов и контрактеров с респондентами, особенно в части корректировки форм оплаты, суммы оплаты, чтобы не было каких-то недоразумений. Были частично жалобы на это. Другой рекомендацией, которую наши активисты хотели бы высказать, это все-таки возможность улучшения достойного труда, тех условий, которыми люди сталкиваются непосредственно на поле. Было довольно часто, мы слышали жалобы об недостаточных условиях питания или снабжения питьевой чистой водой на поле. Условиях гигиены, санитарной гигиены, особенно для женщин на поле, учитывая, что большая часть сборщиков – это все-таки женщины. Конечно, мы понимаем те трудности, с которыми столкнулась страна в период пандемии, но одним из качественных отметок, которые отмечают для себя наши мониторы, было то, что не было проблем со снабжением дезинфицирующих средств на поле и масок. А ведь учитывая, что там сотни тысяч людей, которые вышли туда, они были четко обозначены и в условиях непосредственно сбора хлопка, и в условиях проживания в каких-то общежитиях или своих домах. Это было довольно строго, и мы понимаем, что это стоило больших средств для государства. Другим вопросом, который мы хотели бы на будущее заняться, безусловно, это возможность тиражирования того опыта мониторинга на другие направления в Узбекистане. Мы не должны, я думаю, зацикливаться только непосредственно принудительным трудом на сборе хлопка. Мы должны переводить это на работу текстильных предприятий, перерабатывающей промышленности, наблюдать там, насколько все это близко к стандартам МОД и к тем конвенциям и международным документам, которые подписал и принял на себя Узбекистан как обязательство. Поэтому я полагаю, что эту методологию необходимо развить, и если наши партнеры в лице Министерства труда, в лице Сената непосредственно Танзили Камаловны могли бы пролоббировать это, наша команда активистов могла бы, используя свой опыт, начать работу по проведению тренингов и семинаров, в свою очередь обучая большое количество гражданских активистов на других направлениях. Повторюсь, это пожелание наших активистов. Я не хочу занимать много времени, я с удовольствием отвечу на все ваши вопросы, поставленные на этом брифинге. Но еще раз хочу выразить благодарность всем сторонам, которые организовали этот брифинг и дали возможность гражданскому сообществу высказать свое мнение. Огромное спасибо всем.
Shukrat, thank you very much for your intervention. To the audience, you are here today with us for the Global Discussion Series, Strengthening Labor Market Governance in Uzbekistan, the multi-year effort to eradicate child and forced labor in the cotton sector in Uzbekistan. At this time, I'd like to turn to those who make it possible, the political support as well as the financial support to ensure that these complex development challenges are addressed at a systemic level. The reactions will be from the ambassadors from Switzerland, Germany, United States, the European Union, and the UN coordinator. I will introduce them one by one. I'd like to offer the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Oliver Schav, the ambassador of Switzerland to Uzbekistan. Your Excellency, the floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cassidy, and a very good morning, good day or good evening to all participants and attending. It's a real honor to have the chance of saying a few words in this context. Switzerland has been a first hour supporter of this effort, and we feel quite proud of it. First thing is obviously to recognize that the findings of the TPM 2020 are really very encouraging. They demonstrate, in my view, the continuation and the deepening of the dynamic that we already observed in 2018 and in 2019. And this is truly a spectacularly positive trend that is now confirmed. In other words, the government's political commitments, the policies it's decided upon in the sector are really paying off. Now, just a few observations. Of course, quite a lot could be said. We all understand that the cotton sector and its reform are just a fragment of a massive and wider effort which pertains to all different sectors. So I really would like to focus on the question of the forced labor in the cotton sector. To me, what is really quite important and enjoyable truly is that the TPM proves to be reliable and credible. Its methodological quality should serve as a yardstick for any other attempt to report on forced labor in the cotton sector in Uzbekistan. I took note of the comment by Mr. Astrup that the field is open and anybody can try, but it's quite important as we deal with such a sensitive and essential issue that the methodology we use in reporting upon this phenomenon are serious and sound methodologies. The second observation is that obviously, although efforts need to continue, and I have personally no doubt after 4 years here in Uzbekistan that the Uzbek government will continue to deliver on this. But the point is that Uzbekistan comes ever closer to being forced labor-free in the cotton sector. Some interesting findings of the TPM is that there is some sort of a geographical concentration of most remaining forced labor cases. This leads me to two comments. The first one is that it points perhaps to some real governance and especially corruption problems in the provinces that are still showing large use of forced labor. And the government should absolutely give its full attention to that particular and specific problem. But simultaneously, it also points to the fact that larger regions in Uzbekistan can be considered forced labor free, and that should have implications, so do we hope, as to the access of these regions' cotton to the international market. My last comment is of a more general nature, but really focusing on that specific problem. It is essential, and this is the general position of my government, that only international and universal norms and standards are applied to Uzbekistan, such as the ILO norms and standards. To us, there is neither justification nor reason for the development of Uzbekistan-specific norms. This is all the more important currently, as international comparison show now that Uzbekistan does actually much better in terms of labor norms observance than other very large cotton producers. And I think we should take note of that seriously. So these are my very limited preliminary comment, and I thank you very much to have given me the chance of sharing these thoughts. Thank you very much, Mr. Cassidy.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much for your insights and your comments. Greatly appreciated. At this time, I would like to offer the floor to His Excellency Mr. Gunther Overfeld, the Ambassador of Germany to Uzbekistan.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Cassidy, and good morning to everybody in the US, and good evening to all the colleagues here in Tashkent. I would like, obviously, to point out, not to repeat what has been said, but to point out some elements that are of particular importance to us, to Germany, in evaluating this or last year's 2020 cotton harvest and the third-party monitoring. Mr. Astrup has outlined that the ILO, together with Uzbekistan, is working on the forced child and forced labor issue since 2013, or respectively 2015. And indeed, we have all been able to see in these years a continuing process. I myself, like my Swiss colleague, have been here for 4 years, so I've also been able, not only from documents, but if you wish, as an eyewitness, to follow the events and the constant progress that has been made. Now, having said that, I must admit that we looked with some concern both at this year's harvest and at the third-party monitoring because of Corona that has also severely affected Uzbekistan. And we thought that Corona might really be looked at as some sort of stress test for both the third-party monitoring, but also the reform efforts Uzbekistan has undertaken in that field. And I must admit that against that background and the concerns we have had ahead of the harvest, in light of the Corona situation, we feel a big relief on two fronts. First of all, I think it is very important and should not be overlooked in the discussions of the figures, how many forced labor remains, what is the reduction, etc., as important as that is, but it is in this year or in 2020 particularly important also to take in that the picking was taking place under appropriate conditions with regard to Corona, that is hygienic standards, etc., etc. Now that is easily said, but we have to realize that A, Uzbekistan is a very vast country, B, it is still a developing country, and obviously what may seem to us rather evident, although all of us in our countries have also their problems with Corona, is of course a particular challenge for a country as Uzbekistan, and it is very important for us to note they have mastered this challenge. That is not only to be recognized under the aspect of organization and effort, but in order to do that effort and to manage such an organization, you need a political determination and a will on the various level of government, provinces, etc., to do it. And the result that Mr. Astrup has outlined, I think, underlined very clearly that determination was there. Second, obviously, the Corona conditions also posed particular challenges to the third-party monitoring itself. And I think the methodology that has been developed, the way it was handled, the very strong inclusion of civil society in that is to the credit of everybody that was involved in that third-party monitoring and has been a tremendous success. And as my Swiss colleague, I cannot underline that fact enough because it speaks to the credibility of the results. I mean, all sort of paper results don't help us if they are not credible, but here we have results that we can consider credible. Now, what are some, having said that, what are some major aspects for us? I will be very short on that. First, again, and Mr. Astrup in his introductory remarks gave the figures, we have seen how important the cotton picking is for the vulnerable groups in Uzbekistan, that is the rural population and in particular the women in rural areas. and people that have, if any, only very little cash income possibilities or possibilities to earn cash income during a year. And I think it is one figure only I would want to repeat out of the presentation of Mr. Astrup. If 60% of the pickers said that the 2020 cotton harvest was their only source of cash income, I think that says enough about the relevance of the sector and the relevance of the picking process. The other few elements I would like to mention is, again, no child labor, some individual incidences, Mr. Astrup referred to those. In addition, a considerable further reduction, despite the difficult circumstances, further reduction from 6 to 4% overall. But I think what is more important is that the reduction has, on a year-on-year basis, under these difficult conditions, accelerated to, I think, 30 or so percent, which is a considerable number. I also would like, because also we could, as German embassy, observe that a little bit by ourselves, the very important and constructive role this year, also that has developed over the past years, so there is real continuity in that process of the labor inspectorate. They have been really very active. There have been many more, I think around about 400 or so this year, many more. They were well trained, they were very motivated, they were very active, and they were not shy to point fingers to people that were not sticking to the regulations. All this, I think, is very important and is to keep in mind. Obviously, and the previous speakers have referred to that, there remain pockets, particularly also in some regions of criminal activity or financial interest, and these need to be tackled further. And with that, I come to the end of the remarks I would want to make, and that is obviously what is, in our view, now necessary for the future. First of all, indeed, one has to address these criminal activities that are still there, and I think there are organizational measures that can be taken. For example, stronger involvement of the public prosecutor and other instruments, and that is certainly something we communicate to the Uzbek governments to look into. Second, we need to continue with awareness rising on forced labor in general, on child labor, etc. And I make that point because conditions to do that have considerably improved in Uzbekistan, because we have been seeing over the past 2 years the development of a very lively social media scene of bloggers that have become very active, but very critical of the government. So there are also modern instruments, and let's say there is a civil society from the social media part that is there. So I see good chances to continue the awareness issue further. And finally, as the privatization continues, obviously due attention must be given to further market-based inputs and production, as well as ensuring proper work standards, contractual rights for the farmers and the laborers, etc. And that must be looked into further. I am I'm quite optimistic that we will achieve over time good progress in these areas, as well as I think we should look at the forced labor issue now in an integrated manner. Overall reforms of the labor market in Uzbekistan, also in the other areas, are ongoing, and I think the conditions therefore to achieve progress on that count are very good. And my last point, I would want to strongly support my Swiss colleague in saying that given this situation as outlined by Mr. Astrup, also we do not see any need for Uzbekistan-specific norms, and we will try to encourage German companies, importers, etc., to look with a constructive, with a critical, but also with a very open and constructive mind to the market and to sourcing cotton and textiles from Uzbekistan. We feel the conditions to do that are ripe. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your positive comments. I greatly appreciate it. And of course, the cautious eye that you exhibited in the very beginning of your statements. At this time, I'd like to offer His Excellency Mr. Daniel Rosenblum, the Ambassador of the United States to Uzbekistan, an opportunity to make his remarks. Mr. Ambassador, we welcome your remarks, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. I want to echo many of the statements made by my colleagues who went before me. And I'll just emphasize a few points. First of all, the report by the third-party monitoring project this year shows continued significant progress toward reducing forced labor. And we're very pleased to see that, as well as progress in identifying violations of the laws against involuntary labor and holding violators accountable, which I think is very important. The number of individuals forced to labor declined, the number of individuals held accountable for violations increased, but I think most importantly for the long term, we are seeing a continued strengthening of the institutional basis for holding the sector accountable in future. And what I mean by that, and my colleagues have referred to this, is both the labor inspectorate being stronger and more effective, and civil society being an important element, strengthening the capacity of civil society to do monitoring and to report on the results. So ultimately, of course, the goal of the ILO project is to kind of work itself out of business and to leave behind the capacity to do this in Uzbekistan on its own. And I think there's significant progress towards that. I also want to, again, echoing my colleagues, give credit where it's due, which I think is to the highest levels of the government of Uzbekistan's commitment to eradicating forced labor, which has been clear over a number of years now, several years. And there's clearly high-level commitment that's been consistently applied, even though there's still a lot of work to be done, as Jonas noted. I also want to really commend the ILO team, the civil society monitors, and all partners in the government of Uzbekistan for keeping this program going despite all the obstacles of COVID and all the difficulties that presented. It was actually, to my mind, quite something of a miracle that it was able to continue this year and be done so, relatively without a hitch. I'll just make a couple of quick observations about some of the remaining challenges that were identified in the report, and just to emphasize some of the things that Jonas Astrup reported on. First of all, we noted the lack of any successful criminal prosecutions this year for violations of the laws against forced labor. There's been amendments to the laws made in recent years, and Senator Narbayeva has indicated that there will probably be some further amendments. We believe that it's really important to have that criminal prosecution as a deterrent. So we hope to see that used more effectively going forward. The second issue has to do with the economic incentives in the cotton sector and the reforms in agriculture that have taken place and how much it's changed the incentives. A year ago, as many will recall, the state orders for cotton were abolished. And many of us applauded that and thought this was a great step towards the elimination of forced labor, because we were going to be eliminating the incentive that farmers or hakims or others had to recruit, to coerce labor. But clearly it's more complicated than that. And as was noted, I think a lot of this has to do with the emerging new system of the so-called clusters and their relationship with farmers and relationship with local authorities. And going forward, we'll need to look more closely at the contracts and the relationships that exist and why it is that some of these practices are persisting in certain pockets, in certain regions. And finally, we were very pleased to see this year the prominent role played by the civil society monitoring team in the TPM project. Very exciting to see this diverse group, and as Mr. Ganiev identified, working as a team and doing such effective work. And our hope is that this success of the civil society component will lead to an expansion of space for civil society more broadly in Uzbekistan, and especially to positive changes in the enabling environment for civil society. Again, Senator Narbayeva, in some back and forth that we had in a similar session yesterday, indicated that there would be action in 2021 on this issue. We're hoping to see a new NGO code passed, a more modern code that's more suitable for an open society, and that will make more successes like the one related to the third-party monitoring project possible. So with that, let me just thank you very much for this chance to participate. I noticed there's a number of questions in the chat function and the Q&A, and I hope we'll be able to answer some of those, if not during the session, then afterwards, even some very specific factual questions that Jonas can answer about the numbers and so on. So I'm glad to see so much interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Rosenblum. Yes, work ourselves out of business. After 37 years in the UN, it requires a watchful eye, vigilance, and engagement and collaboration. So thank you.
Kevin, you are muted.
I think many people prefer it that way. I was just saying that, Mr. Ambassador, thank you very much. Working ourselves out of business is certainly our mantra. And after 37 years in the UN system, this does require obviously a watchful eye, vigilance and engagement and in collaboration. So thank you very much, sir. At this time, I would like to offer the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Jussi Narvi, the Ambassador of the European Union to Uzbekistan. Ambassador Narvi, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. First of all, congratulations where they are due, the National Administration of Uzbekistan, for reducing by 1/3 the share of forced labor, and to ILO and the civil society activists who did a marvelous job in carrying out this third-party monitoring. Now, I'm in a very fortunate position to speak after my three esteemed colleagues, and I can cover most of the ground by simply saying that I fully agree with them. That allows me to focus on what I have had on top of my mind recently, which is, why didn't it work? We learned a year ago that the government would withdraw from the market, that the cotton harvest would be left to market forces, the incentive for forced labor would disappear, and yet the forced labor didn't. We still have people working involuntarily, and they are paid just like everybody else. So what's the point? There's plenty of labor force available. Why is it necessary to force people to work? Why are there such unbalanced contracts that create different kind of quota and pressure? Why is there still racketeering, companies being forced to contribute financially to the effort? And I think that one of the problems is that the whole problem issue has been looked as a social issue, as a legal issue, as an enforcement issue. I think that what we would need also is an economic study to understand the forces that are driving this thing. what is missing in the market. Clearly, one element seems to be the functioning labor market, functioning intermediation between the groups of pickers and the farms that need them. There are monopsonies created by the clusters that perhaps should be abolished. There are probably economic connections that are invisible because the corporate governance doesn't make those clusters transparent enough. So perhaps in the future, the third-party monitoring mandate could be extended also to make an economic study to understand why forced labor continues. Of course, it's important to continue strong enforcement, more cooperation between the prosecutor and the labor inspectors, because there is crime, and the crime needs to be eradicated and punished. But to discover that crime and go beyond those officials who have been punished this year to the root causes, we need to understand the economics. And I think that is the next step in order to make the final mile. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. I greatly appreciate those comments. Obviously, labor market governance is very important, and looking at the underlying social economic issues need equal attention. So thank you very much.
Kevin, you're muted. You muted yourself, I think.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you very much. I appreciate the comments, Mr. Ambassador. And labor market governance is certainly important to the ILO, and addressing the underlying social economic issues does need equal attention as well. So thank you very much. At this time, Ms. Helena Fraser, UN Resident Coordinator in Uzbekistan, I would like to offer you the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you for inviting me to this important event, and much appreciation to the ILO third-party monitoring team for the robust and credible report, and to the civil society activists for their engagement and their passionate commitment, which is really impressive to see. I think we can all acknowledge the significant progress Uzbekistan has made under the leadership of Tanzila Kamalovna Narbayeva and the National Commission on Forced Labor and Human Trafficking. Indeed, when we look back at the situation in Uzbekistan a few years ago, I'd venture to say that the progress that's been made confirms that Uzbekistan has important lessons to share with other countries facing forced labor and child labor in terms of coordination across the legislature, government, employers, trade unions, and civil society in tackling these issues. As we've heard, a lot of progress has been made, and political will is clearly there. However, as the recommendations of the third-party monitoring report make clear, while we've seen additional progress this year compared to last year compared to the year before, of course, we cannot rest easy. And that's why the UN country team in Uzbekistan is mobilized and engaged to support the government to take forward the recommendations arising out of the ILO third-party monitoring report, as well as related recommendations deriving from the UN human rights treaty bodies and procedures, as well as recommendations linked to our analysis of bottlenecks for Uzbekistan to achieve its sustainable development goals and objectives. So how are we going to do this? Along with other development partners, the UN country team will be supporting further reforms in the agriculture sector. But we'll also be supporting further judicial reforms and work to strengthen anti-corruption mechanisms and national human rights monitoring institutions. work to improve the space for civil society. We have seen progress, but as the Ambassador of the United States has mentioned, there needs to be a more clear environment for civil society to function and less barriers for civil society organizations to register. And we also will continue our work to support women's empowerment and women's access to skills and work, which we see again and again is a challenge in this field. We're also working to support active labour market policies and enhanced social protection systems, both of which will contribute to reducing some of the risks that the report throws into relief. I want to conclude by saying that I mean, this is a trite remark in a way, but reforms are never easy. Changing the entire agriculture system, changing attitudes, entrenched behaviors and norms is difficult and takes time. We've seen a significant amount of progress thanks to the time and investment by so many actors around this table. The government, the trade unions, the employers' organizations, civil society, the embassies, the ILO, NGOs, and really the results are showing. The fact that Uzbekistan has embraced, in fact, civil society and human rights defenders is particularly remarkable in this effort and deserves recognition. So my message today is really to those of you listening from overseas: the international community must remain engaged. Keep supporting the ongoing market-based reforms in the agriculture sector, as well as the reforms focused on strengthening the rule of law, civil society, and anti-corruption. And secondly, mobilize partners to constructively engage on the long-term goal, supporting Uzbekistan to move up the value chain, to become an exporter of textiles and garments instead of raw cotton. This has the potential to replace temporary jobs in fragile situations with decent work that can benefit many people, especially rural women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. And indeed, a value-added production is certainly welcomed and will increase the economic opportunities for people in country. At this time, the last speaker in this particular section, but not the least, is Mr. Marco Montovanelli, the World Bank Country Manager in Uzbekistan. Mr. Montovanelli, please, if you would give us your comments, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. It's hard for me to add something without repeating the comments that preceded me that I agree with. Let me start by thanking the CSOs, activists, government organizations, and ILO that produced this report and made this report possible under very difficult circumstances this year, without undermining the technical and the academic quality of the report. Of course, like everybody else, we welcome at the World Bank the not only continued but accelerated progress this year in eradication of forced labor. I do share some of the ambassador comments that I think Uzbekistan has left behind the status of pariah among cotton producers, and this continuous progress is there to support that case. There were actions taken by the government this year that have helped advance progress. We heard the elimination of state quota. I was particularly impressed by the report about the reactive and proactive active monitoring by labor inspectors. Despite lower claims, the number of inspections was maintained high. Very important. Now, we shouldn't rest on this success. The international community and the Uzbek authorities, it is possible to continue to make progress. It is possible to reach this harder to change, possibly situations that still account for 4% of forced labor reported this year. I think the report, in this sense, like every year, makes important recommendations that can help the country continue to advance on this path. Some that are important in our opinion, and we heard it before, enforcing the criminalizations of forced labor abuses, granting an indirect access to all workplaces by inspectors would be important, and indeed expand the NGO space, expand it because that's the best assurance of having a permanent, independent monitoring of the situation on the ground. The report mentions also, and we fully share, the importance of advancing broad market-based reforms in the agricultural sectors. Particularly important in the aftermath, we hope it's going to be soon an aftermath of the corona pandemic. In cotton, I agree with my colleagues for the European Union. There is a need to look at the clusters, their creation and transparent operation. I agree with the US ambassador. We cannot talk about contracts if they're not really commercial contracts between clusters and farmers. Prices are not yet determined by markets, they're set by formulas, but it's the early stage of an economic transformation, and it's normal to go through this. The important is not to be stuck at this level, but to continue to progress. More broadly, we look at the agri-food industry as a job creator for the future of Uzbekistan. In many countries, we see this sector shedding jobs. In Uzbekistan, there's a possibility of creating new jobs that keep pace with the demographic trends. This will require reducing the areas that's cultivated as cotton and wheat in favor of other cultures that are more labor intensive. At the same time, strengthening the productivity both in cotton and wheat and in these areas, and also expanding, as I said, cultures, horticulture, livestock, textile, food processing jobs. It is possible. We have done the economic analysis, and this process needs to be supported. Because 80% of the poor in Uzbekistan live in rural areas. Just looking at cotton, we are talking about 2 million people, 2/3 are women, 60%, this is their only source of cash income. So we have a duty to help the country diversify and create and maintain jobs in rural areas. We at the World Bank remain fully committed to these goals and to eliminate the root causes of forced labor. We have created the multi-donor trust fund that is supporting third-party monitoring in 2015, and I thank all the donors present here tonight. That multi-donor trust fund finances this work, but also analysis, technical assistance, capacity building that goes beyond monitoring. We are investing 1.5 billion currently in agricultural modernization. And we are fully committed to help Uzbekistan develop a competitive, productive, environmental sustainable agricultural sector that operates in full respect of workers' rights. So we see definitely the glass as half full for Uzbekistan if we look at the trajectory in the sector and in cotton since 2017. And we would like to send a message to the international friends connected that it is important to maintain this support to help the country advance at the same pace with the next steps of its economic and social transition. Thank you very much.
Mr. Montovanelli, thank you very much for your kind remarks, and really appreciate all of the ambassadors and representatives. So again, Ambassador Shav, Ambassador Overfeld, Ambassador Rosenblum, Ambassador Narvi, Ms. Fraser and Mr. Montovanelli. Thank you very much for your continued support, guidance, and obviously the support through the elimination of child labor and forced labor in Uzbekistan, and then looking at the ongoing issues of labor market governance. We are running out of time. We do have one last speaker to present their remarks, His Excellency Mr. Erkan Mukid. Sorry, my apologies for the pronunciation, Mukidinov. But before I do that, if I may just very quickly draw your attention to comments that have come out today from the Cotton Campaign, which has recognized the significant progress that has taken place in ending forced labor. The press release they've sent out today, they've indicated that they did not document any cases of forced labor in some of the cotton growing districts for the first time in 10 years. So a testament to the work and the results. They see that government measures such as higher prices for cotton, stronger enforcement by the labor inspectorate, and improved recruitment undertaken in the cotton clusters had led to a decrease in forced labor. Also that the observation that COVID-19 pandemic has increased the number of voluntary pickers in Uzbekistan who would have otherwise suffered job losses and income loss, that they had options for employment. However, there are key elements of forced labor in the system that are still entrenched, and some new abuses have been emerging. Farmers in districts, for example, were forced to grow cotton and could not negotiate the terms. They go on to say that there are also some legacy factors that remain intact. Although the quota system has been eliminated in March of 2020, the central government has issued clear and repeated messages on the prohibition of forced labor, but sometimes the local officials who were mandated to ensure these had tried to fulfill the production targets, which may have caused these issues as well. With that being said, a question from the audience was, when can we expect a positive decision from the Cotton Campaign to stop the boycott? ILO as an institution believes that boycotts actually sometimes do hurt the very people we're meant to support. There are lots of questions here. I would say that with everybody's agreement, and certainly Jonas and Shukrat, if we could take those questions and put them on the ILO USA website, you can come there and we'll have responses to that. You can also find the report on the ILO's website and on the ILO USA website. At this time, I would like to give the floor to His Excellency. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy, for giving me the floor. Assalamu alaikum. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on the geographic location of our participants. Dear ambassadors, dear our partners from United Nations, World Bank, and ILO, our dear human rights activists, as we're joking, our 17 angels who helped us to fight the evil of forced labor on the cotton field, dear our partners from Cotton Campaign. Thank you very much, our dear ambassadors, for your serious and very deep comments. We are sharing your some of your points on the lot of issues in this sector, especially market reforms in the cotton industry, in the agriculture industry, transparency of our clusters, issues with criminal penalty for forced labor issues, and also with registration of human rights activists. And we will work on it. And I think, I hope in this year, we will come back to you with good news on these issues. So I will speak on behalf of Madame Narbayeva and the closing remarks on Russian. So let me speak on Russian. And moreover, my in English is not so good as Uzbek of Mr. Rosenblum. So I will proceed on Russian. Translator, interpreter will help us. Уважаемые участники видеоконференции, позвольте выразить благодарность всем участникам за проведение открытого диалога и за выраженные теплые слова в адрес Узбекистана, а также за предоставленные рекомендации и предложения по улучшению положения дел в сфере труда и принудительного труда. Мы высоко оценим сотрудничество Узбекистана с МОД, который рассматриваем как лидера по поддержанию национальных программ достойного труда, развития социального диалога, социальной защиты, обеспечения занятости и охраны труда. Достижение достойного труда для всех нас является общей целью. Мы приложим все усилия, чтобы ее реализовать. Мы намерены активно продолжить начатую работу, в том числе касательно полного искоренения принудительного труда. От имени узбекской стороны хочу подчеркнуть, что для нас это является высшим приоритетом. Ключевые меры в этом смысле направления включают: первое – продолжение реформирования сельскохозяйственного сектора ввиду перехода на рыночные отношения, неукоснительное привлечение к административной и уголовной ответственности лиц, использующих принудительный труд. Третье – укрепление инспекции труда для эффективного выявления, расследования и предотвращения нарушений в сфере принудительного труда. Четвертое – усиление потенциала Центра содействия занятости в структуре нашего министерства и частных агентств занятости в вопросах справедливого найма в стране и за рубежом. И, наконец, последнее – проведение национального мониторинга профсоюзов, то есть его продолжение, парламентского и общественного контроля на постоянной основе. Мы дальше будем тесно сотрудничать с представителями институтов гражданского общества в Узбекистане и за рубежом, приложим все усилия для улучшения условий, способствующих свободе слова и объединения. Их мнение предоставляет собой неотъемлемую часть механизма сдержки противовесов в реализации реформ в нашей стране. Представители гражданского общества и впредь будут активно участвовать в наших различных проектах, направленных на создание достойных условий труда, защиты и продвижения трудовых прав работодателей и работников, противодействия торговле людьми, обеспечения гендерного равенства и в целом защиты прав человека. С 2021 года планируем проводить мониторинг по недопущению сельского и принудительного труда не только в хлопковом секторе, но и в других отраслях экономики. А для проведения данных мониторингов мы рассчитываем на всестороннюю поддержку Международной организации труда. Пользуясь случаем, разрешите обратиться к Всемирному банку и другим международным партнерам о дальнейшей поддержке проектов МОД в Узбекистане, особенно проекты мониторинга третьей стороны. Он очень важен для нас, и мы с этим проектом намерены работать до конца, до полного искоренения принудительного труда в нашей стране. Хочу вас уверить, что нынешнее руководство страны глубоко привержено защите и продвижению прав человека и особенно трудовых прав наших граждан. Принудительный труд и детский труд неприемлемы для узбекского общества. Мы прилагаем все усилия, чтобы наши дети и будущие поколения росли и развивались в гармоничном демократическом обществе, и очень надеемся на вашу поддержку. На основании рекомендаций и предложений, высказанных на внешневчерашнем круглом столе и на сегодняшнем мероприятии, как вчера было сказано председателем Национальной комиссии по торговле людьми и принудительному труду госпожой Тадзиль Камаловой Нарбаевой, будет разработана отдельная дорожная карта на 2021 год по реализации рекомендаций и всех комментариев, которые сейчас были высказаны вами. Уважаемые коллеги, завершая свое выступление, хотел бы еще раз поблагодарить организаторов данной видеоконференции. Думаю, что оно прошло очень плодотворно. Благодарю всех наших зарубежных партнеров и надеюсь на продолжение активного сотрудничества. Thank you very much.
Mr. First Deputy Minister, thank you very much for your comments, and we look forward to continuing our work in Uzbekistan. We are unfortunately out of time. As I mentioned, we will put the questions up on our website and the report will be available there. I wish to thank the World Bank for its fruitful cooperation with the ILO, and of course grateful to the governments of Switzerland, Germany, United States, and of course the European Union, and also to the Uzbek constituents and the civil society monitors who have helped conduct the monitoring. Unfortunately, our lead speaker, Her Excellency Madam Danzila Nurabayeva, wishes she could be here, and she sends her regards to everyone. Thank you for joining the ILO's discussion series, Strengthening Labor Market Governance in Uzbekistan. We invite you to come join us in the future. Thank you very much. If you have any further questions, you can please send them to the ILO at Washington at ILO.org, and we're more than happy to respond back to you as best as we can. Again, thank you to all of our speakers today, Jonas and Shukrat. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to see you both again. And at this point, I will conclude. Thank you, everyone, and good luck, and we'll see you soon.